Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, heroes and villains. I'm your host, Deshaun Fauntleroy. I know your time is precious, so we're going to get right into today's show. In today's show, the big idea is Juliannes Soviero. Show notes, links, conversation, and more at sportsmastery.com/55. As I said before, our guest today is Juliannes Soviero. She's an athletic performance consultant, certified hypnotist, and havening practitioner, and the author of Unleash Your True Athletic Potential and Empowered Recruiting, the Student Athlete's College Selection Guide. She became obsessed with optimal athletic performance after an injury nearly destroyed her pitching career over 15 years ago. She has since studied kinematics, injury prevention, nutrition, and the mental game in order to help other athletes maximize their abilities. Julianne has also appeared in media across the country, including Fox, KVVU, and SiriusXM. Julianne has been a personal trainer for over a decade and was one of the first pitching coaches to study the performance demands of softball pitching. She has produced countless award-winning pitchers. Now, as I said before, we have Juliannes Soviero coming on to the show. I'm going to front load this. This isn't a massive play, but it is a deep one. Today, we're going to be discussing Julianne's top 3 priorities as a pitching coach, the importance of stressing mechanics and technique, strategies for helping athletes set and achieve goals, how to stay in a competitive mindset, 4 keys to optimal performance, and the power of perseverance. Without further ado, I want to bring Juliannes Soviero onto the Sports Mastery podcast. Julianne, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm awesome because I'm so psyched to be here.
I know you've been a softball pitching coach for a long time. You've been working with, you've been producing some outstanding softball pitchers. Tell us about your collegiate athletic career and where you pitched at.
I pitched at Manhattan College, which is a Division I program. And I think the crazy thing about it is, as you had mentioned earlier, an injury did nearly destroy my career. I tore my cartilage in my wrist, and that was devastating. I didn't know how to properly recover the way I do now. I had to have surgery. I really lost a full year and then some. So that's why one of my top priorities when working with my athletes is making sure that everything is in check, that their mechanics are good, that we minimize our opportunities to be injured.
Did you figure out, or did they discuss what caused the injury?
In my particular case, it wasn't mechanical. The way that my bone structure is I have really, really long bones, kind of a little bit abnormally so. And so that every time I would snap my wrist, the bone would literally dig into the cartilage to the point where it ripped. So then they had to shave down the bone and also sew the cartilage. So it was quite an annoying surgery.
So I'm sure when you look back on that's a tremendous learning experience and some things, I'm sure you share those concepts with your athletes.
Well, it's not the type of learning experience that any of us want to go through. But in the end, I feel like it makes me understand much better when my athletes, let's say, get a traumatic injury. Like one of my kids recently was sliding into home and the catcher stepped on her arm and broke it. And you realize that what athletes go through when they're injured in any sport is really a lot like depression, or probably is classified as a type of depression because the thing that you love and the thing that defined you is no longer part of your life. You're excluded from it. And knowing that and having been through it really helps me to help others.
Certainly. And we're going to get to that. I wanted to ask you, what are your top 3 priorities as a pitching coach?
So as a pitching coach, I think the same is true of any athletic instructor, is I am looking for, number 1, to get that mental game right, because you could be doing everything in your power to make yourself, perfect physically. And if that mental game isn't there, then you're still going to be bested by people who do have that part together. Number 2, making sure we have the kinematics, the mechanics that are down to the point where you won't be injured. And number 3, and I kind of have to split this between 2 categories, but proper cross-training and nutrition, because it's very easy as asymmetrical athletes to develop muscular imbalances. And as every American knows, it's also very easy to eat like garbage. So those are two things that, whether people like it or not, really affect their athletic performance and their recovery time tremendously.
So what I'm hearing was really important when we're aspiring to play at a high level. You have to have a mental game. Whatever sport it is that you do, you have to have sound mechanics and technique, and then you have to balance that with strength training and nutrition.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Talk to me further about like the importance of mechanics and technique, especially for a pitcher, because I know some softball pitching coaches, and I've worked with softball pitchers out here in Portland on the strength and conditioning side.
And isn't it amazing how just making something a little bit more efficient can add, like, seriously, in some cases, 5-6 miles an hour, sometimes more. So to me, if I look at someone's motion and I'm seeing, let's say, for example, that there's a degree of hyperextension, or that the weight isn't in the right position, or that the throwing shoulder isn't positioned correctly, or that the timing and the sequencing of the joints is off. All of those things affect speed and accuracy, but they also affect whether or not that athlete is going to set him or herself up for injury.
Right. I've worked with softball pitchers. I've also worked with baseball pitchers, and we found in the research that just them doing power cleans alone appropriately and systematically over time in a training block, or adding that into their training program and periodization, that they can often add anywhere from 3, 5 to 7 miles on their fastball.
They're learning more about that explosive movement, and they're cross-training. They're using, it's so important that people just think like, oh, well, I'm going to do 500 pitches this week. Let's say, for example, you pitched 5 days and you did 100 reps every day. And that would be, kind of excessive in some ways. But if you're doing that, what you're doing is you're taxing the same muscle groups over and over and over again, and you're not giving them a chance to balance out. So how do you expect to max out that way? How do you expect to really be your physical best at that point? And the answer is you can't be. You need to cross-train.
Yes, we would have to strengthen the muscles that we're working, but also train those synergistic muscles and those antagonistic muscles at the same time.
Yes, we want those antagonistic muscles to balance out. Exactly. And that's where, I know you do yoga as well. And that's where, if we don't do some yoga to get some flexibility and some range of motion, like, yoga should be a part of every single athlete's repertoire, simply because you're getting the range of motion that you wouldn't normally get. You're getting balance that you wouldn't normally get. You're engaging your muscles in a different way. And then, of course, you have that mental capacity and that mental focus that's in yoga that is in really basically no other cross-training that I can think of off the top of my head.
And surprisingly, doing the yoga is very, very challenging, but with the right instructor, they let you go at your own pace. So you're always at the edge, as far as what you can handle. But, as you go over time, you get stretched a little further, and that's like physically, but also psychologically,
Yeah.
I know you're big on helping student athletes set and achieve goals. I know you're a certified hypnotherapist. You've done a lot of work in the field. I know you have a havening program. Talk to me about helping student athletes set and achieve goals, and how does that work in your program, Julie?
I think that I have to do a lot of reality checks with goals. And I think that's what most good coaches do. You're laughing too, because on the one hand, people tend to set goals that aren't specific enough to actually achieve. A girl will come in and say, like, well, I want to get faster. And I'm like, okay, that's not a goal. Because you need to be able to say with specificity, okay, I need to get 3 miles an hour faster by September 1st because I have a showcase coming up. So you need something that is specific and measurable and that has a deadline, but you also have to have that driving force behind it that's going to get you out and make you grind every day. If you're just like, oh, well, my mom wants me to get faster. No, ain't gonna work, sweetheart. Sorry about that. we have to do it so you've got that internal drive that's going to make you want to get out there and grind every day, and not so you're pleasing your parents or so you're pleasing someone else.
Right. And that goes back to that part where we're looking more for intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. So it's really about, what's driving you from the inside. And I like what you said about being specific. It's not so much that you want to get faster. Maybe we want to take 0.2 of a second off of our 60-yard dash or off of our 40-yard dash.
That's a much better goal. And it's an even better goal when you set a date to that and you're held accountable to that date. You got to have someone holding your feet to the fire a little bit, That's what we have to do as coaches. But no, in a different place, you have to be able to say to student athletes, especially those who are looking for collegiate scholarships, you have to be able to say, is your work ethic essentially comparable to your goals? Like if you want to play at Division I, and you're practicing once a week, you better get your ass in gear, because that's not going to cut it. So we have to make realistic goals for that person's work ethic as well. How is it for you? Like if you're speaking to a group of kids, and I know you've done seminars, workshops, and consultant presentations before, if you're speaking to 100 kids, maybe you have parents there and coaches, what's that like do you ever ask the kids like, who wants to play Division I softball? Do you often ask that question? I think that's a conversation that we have to start having younger and younger, because as I'm sure most of you know, most of the time in terms of like Division I recruiting, they're recruiting 8th and 9th graders now. And that's when these kids are verbaling, even though technically it's against NCAA guidelines, this is how it's happening now. So I find that we're having to have these conversations earlier and earlier, and we're having to explore academic interests earlier and earlier to get to where we need to be in the college process at the right time. And that's also why I wrote Empowered Recruiting, because I felt like people were so misinformed about the process, and then they're wondering why they're going into their senior year and nobody has any scholarships left.
Yeah, the interesting part about what you're talking about with your books and you giving your presentations and seminars is that when you bring all of this back to goals, for me, in my experience, if I ask who wants to play D1, I all hands go up. But then I have to ask those kids, well, what are you doing to prepare for tomorrow? Because there's a lot that has to happen between 9th and 12th grade. And 90% of the time, those kids fall off. So, at the end of the day, it's going to be, 2%, less than 2%, that's going to actually follow that path. And I try to explain to kids, parents, and coaches with athletes that, it is a path and these are the things that you have to do. This is a step-by-step process when it comes to your academics, when it comes to SAT, ACT preparation, doing the practice exams, doing your training, doing the strength work, but also doing your skills training. And then now you have the added component of your mental skills training or being mentally conditioned. So there's a lot that goes into that. And what we find is sometimes it's just too much and overwhelming. But, those are the people that they probably weren't committed in the first place.
Yes, and that's a good test to see how committed you are, because the thing is that for anybody who's actually played at a Division I level, you're going to find not only you're going to have to balance your academics, but with any type of interning that you do or that is required of your major, you're going to have to make sure that you're at those 6 a.m. lifts. You're going to have multiple practices in a day, sometimes totaling like 5 hours. Like you have volunteer work with your team, you have fundraising with your team, you have massive travel schedules that you might have to miss class for. So it's like you have to look at realistically, if you're not willing to put the time in the recruiting process, that's a great test of, you know what, you don't belong at Division I then, because imagine what your schedule is going to be like when you're actually there.
Right.
So that's kind of a great way of telling how committed you are.
I'm going to put a scenario in front of you. Let's say you got the sophomore or junior pitcher. Maybe she's already committed to Cal University or Stanford. She has a new boyfriend, first boyfriend, sustained an injury, coming off an injury, getting back. How do you keep that young lady in a competitive mindset when you got the different social dynamics and maybe an injury going on? And let's just throw another twist in. The parents just divorced.
Okay, so that's like an amazing thing that you just mentioned, because literally another coach and mentor of mine, good friend, Rob Cruz, and I were literally talking about very similar scenarios, almost like you are psychic, where
kind of.
But, you know, the situation is this. For any athlete who really wants to prioritize their life goals, life is going to throw a million distractions at you. And that's just going to be your entire life. If you want to be successful in your career, there are a million people out there who let themselves succumb to those distractions and who have that woe is me victim attitude that, well, you know, I can't help this. This is my surrounding. You know, I need to spend time with my boyfriend. My parents are getting divorced. I need to, you know, and you can have that sort of attitude and then just use it as an excuse as to why you never accomplish anything. Or you can say, you know what, despite everything that's going on, I can rise above it. I won't allow myself to be acted upon. I am going to do everything I can with my circumstances. And just changing that attitude, making that mental shift is more important than anything I could tell you to do physically. Because if you're willing to make that mental shift, then every day we could be like, okay, here's an actionable plan for you. Okay, start out now. Step one, you know, maybe this is your time with your boyfriend. This is your rehab time in the morning. This is the time you're going to spend pitching. And then we block it out. But first of all, you got to get out of that victim mentality. You have to be proactive in everything you do. You can't be reactive. It's all about being proactive.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because those are the topics that we discuss in my workbook in different chapters. One is keeping a positive mental attitude, and then positive and constructive self-talk, and, you know, having strategies to overcome setbacks is really important. And those are some things I think us as coaches collectively, sometimes we forget. And, you know, sometimes the parents aren't even privy to having certain strategies in place, and they kind of just go at it blind without having, you know, tools, you know, to overcome setbacks or overcome frustration or when things don't go their way. So I think what you touched on was some very powerful points.
I think the other thing that a lot of us fail to, like, we don't want to admit the fact that sometimes parents enable excuses. And I know you're probably thinking of at least one or two parents off the top of your head. Every coach out there that's listening is thinking of one or two parents off the top of their head. They're like, well, you know, she's not doing well because the coach isn't giving her a chance. Or, you know, well, you know, she hasn't had a chance to practice because, you know, it's been a busy week for her, and, you know, this and that. And it's like, okay, if the coach is giving you a chance, what have you done to earn that chance? You know, what have you, like, and you have to start thinking about it again from that proactive standpoint and stop enabling excuses, because that's just going to let them be like, oh, I'm a victim and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, I've seen it on numerous occasions where you have the athlete or the athlete and the parent. Athlete isn't putting in the work that they should. They're in a different place in their head. They think they've already arrived, but you know what it's like where you think you should be and where you actually are. There, you know, there's a middle ground, and that's normally where the truth lies. And then they get the opportunities, and then they mess up, or they make mistakes, or they make errors, or they drop balls, or they don't throw strikes, and then they blame, complain, and defend, and come up with more excuses as to why they fail, where you got your opportunity and you dropped the first two balls that were thrown to you, or you walk five batters in the game, you know. So I can't have five balls thrown at you and you drop four just to catch one. It's not how the game works. You know, we're looking at a 90 to 95% success rate in terms of, you know, I'm sure you have percentages in your head as far as like pitchers throwing strikes. When I'm looking at running backs and receivers, I want you to catch 9 out of every 10 balls that's thrown to you. That's how you stay on the field, not a quarter of the balls, you know.
And that's so important. That's why, yep, sometimes you got to look at those stats and see where you're failing statistically. You know what I mean? I'm not a huge person like where we just go in and like, oh, what's your ERA? Because you can't go out and pitch thinking about your ERA, but you can use that information afterwards to see where you're able to better yourself.
Without a doubt. And it can also corroborate, what's going on in practice. Are you doing your mental training and all the small things? So it's definitely not the main thing, but you can use it as a variable, one of the variables to look at, the hows and whys of, the outcomes of performance and what happened before, and use that as, I guess you could say leverage to change or add, to increase performance.
Yes. And that's the other reason why I like the idea of keeping pitch count for obviously both baseball and softball, because a lot of people will say like, she's getting kind of tired at the end. I'm like, well, how many pitches has she thrown? Oh, we don't know. Well, okay, so maybe her endurance is good if this is her second game of the day and she's at 120 pitches and now she's starting to get tired. Well, she's okay then, you know what I mean? But the other case, if we're at 50 pitches and everything's starting to slow down, then we have to work more endurance and we have to get more focused late in the game. So you have to change your strategies based on this information that you're collecting. You have to be smart about that sort of thing.
Definitely. So what are some of the keys that you would like to share with our audience, and definitely anybody from the softball or pitching community, in terms of your keys to optimal performance, 4 things that the athlete, parent, or coach should consider?
So optimal performance kind of goes towards the same type of stuff that I would focus on in pitching lessons. You need that mental training. You need to train it every day the same way you would train your muscles. You need that nutrition, and you need it with first thing in the morning, starting hydrated, making sure you understand what nutrient timing is so that you're eating properly for your sport and for when you train. Because if you don't know about what you should be eating when, you could be really just like wasting so much time and energy. If you have like something very high in protein before you go out and perform, like your kidneys are being really taxed and you're much more likely to get more dehydrated. And a lot of people don't know that. They're like, oh, I should have a ton of protein before I go out. That's completely inaccurate, because we don't want to be trying to burn protein when we get out. We want to be trying to burn quality carbohydrates and fats, like type of things like fruits and nuts. But then after that, of course, we've got to make sure our mechanics are in order. And then we've got to make sure that our cross training is in order, that everything is set up that's going to better our mind and better our body for our sport.
So if you're listening to this, ladies and gentlemen, 4 keys to optimal athletic performance is: 1, you have to do the mental work. You have to prepare mentally. You have to strengthen yourself mentally. Now, the flip side of that is that you have to do the physical work. And then that entails your mechanics, your techniques, your training, depending on what sport you play and the specificity for that. Now, outside of that, you have to be consistent. Now, the biggest thing, you have to get your nutrition in. And something that we failed to mention earlier is you have to get the proper amount of sleep. So I'll put the nutrition and the sleep together on that. You're young. We need 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And the research has shown is the most important hours are those hours that you get in before 12 o'clock at night.
Because it's more consistent with your circadian rhythms, right? Like a lot of people like, oh, I went to bed at midnight and I slept until noon and I'm still feeling tired. Yeah, because it's going against your normal circadian rhythm. Your body is not designed to do that. Much better to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier. It's better for your body, better for your performance.
Exactly. Julie, I want you to talk to me about the power of perseverance, because I know you've overcome some injuries in the past. I've also talked to you, very briefly throughout one of your days, and I know you've seen as many as like 35 to 40 clients in a single day. So there's a certain amount of perseverance when you overcome injury, but there's a certain amount that you have to grow your business. So if you could discuss that, I think that would be really great for our audience to hear, how you look at the power of perseverance.
I mean, I think there's an amazing book called The Compound Effect that everybody should read. You can get it at your library usually. And basically it's just saying how persevering at what you really want to succeed at every single day in, a year will literally change your life. So it's the type of thing where I think so many people want that quick fix and they really want to give up. after they're only putting in maybe 1 week, 2 weeks, like, and you know what? You're not going to see any substantial changes at that point. The idea is that when we go at something every day and we don't take breaks and we don't quit, no matter what it is, we're going to be good at it. As long as you're finding the right coaches to help you along the way, because the only other variable there is, of course, I've had kids come from other instructors where they taught them incorrectly, and then you have to spend double the time fixing that. But the idea is you cannot quit. If this is meaningful to you, if this really means something to you, then you got to get out there and you've got to plan for it every day, and you've got to make it part of your existence, so where it's like in your blood. And I know in terms of like building my business, and I'm looking at ways to build my business literally every single day. I spend at least an hour on it, no matter how many clients I see, because I don't always see all these clients in person. I might see like 20 physical clients in a day and then check in with 10 other clients online. But that's something that's a main priority for me every day: personal growth and building my business every single day.
Got you. We're getting into the fourth quarter. I would like for you to share with me one of your more recent success stories with one of your pitching athletes.
Oh my God, there are so many, so it makes it hard. But I because so many of them are playing at such high levels and doing just such wonderful things. But I recently had, just this year alone, I had 2 of my athletes compete in different leagues for their state titles, and the one won her state title. And then one of my athletes, Julia Tarantino, and another one of my athletes, Meg Vecchione, just with Team Long Island, they just won the USSSA championship, meaning they bested everyone in the country for that. So that was pretty impressive. I got some nice video footage of them winning that. So, I mean, we're talking about, now that I've been doing this a long time, these kids have success at a very high level. And what I think is really important for them now is I try to get them to coach so that they can share their success with the younger generation, because it's something that we have to keep perpetuating. So we don't have ambition problems, because it's really easy to get ambition problems. But if you have that cycle of, everybody's working hard and they're showing the value of working hard, then we're changing lives that way. That's what we're doing.
Tell us the titles of your books again, and where can our audience find your books, Julie?
So Amazon, love Amazon. You can get everything there, including my books. Okay. And the first book I wrote is Unleash Your True Athletic Potential. And both books are designed for athletes of any sport. Unleash Your True Athletic Potential is really about the different ways that you can talk about cross-training, hydration, different types of nutrient timing and things like that, which are all also things that you can email me about through my website and things like that. I'd be happy to talk to you about. And then the second book, which I think is the most relevant of all for every athlete, is Empowered Recruiting, which is the Student Athlete's College Selection Guide. Because so many people, the reason I wrote it, and it took me many years to put it all together, is because so many athletes are misinformed about the recruiting process. And then what's terrible about it is then they learn from other misinformed people, or they get looped into some sort of scheme about, oh, well, I can get you recruited. It only costs $3,000 and this and that, and it's just nonsense. And the most important thing in terms of if you want to play at a collegiate level is you have to educate yourself, not only about the school, not only about the sports of the school, but about the recruiting process itself. And that's what this book is about.
Excellent. Before we close out, I want you to share with my audience where they can find you at and learn more about your programs, and what other programs do you offer?
So I do a lot of different programs. I have some online programs specifically for pitchers, the Elite Pitchers Blueprint. I do havening, I do hypnosis, and I do have some programs where like athletes can come fly out to me if you know you're outside of New York State, and I work with you for a couple of days. But basically, I can also kind of talk to you via Skype or a bunch of different ways. So there really are no limitations anymore with the online world. If you're like, oh, that's great, but she's in New York, I'm like, listen, I'm everywhere because I have a computer, you know?
Yes.
So basically the best way to get a hold of me is to go to the website at flawlessfastpitch.com, and you can email me there. You can find Julianne Soviero at Twitter, Flawless Fast Pitch on Instagram, Flawless Fast Pitch on Facebook, Julianne Soviero on LinkedIn. So any medium you're on, I'm also on, and I am ready to work with you.
My role is to help student athletes develop the mental skills for success in sports, which carry over to their life as well. I work with normal people who are under additional perceived pressures to perform in their sport. My goals are to teach student athletes how to be more confident, focus better, stay composed under pressure, practice more efficiently, and develop more effective pre-game routines. I become an extension of the athlete's support team. Unlike a psychotherapist or psychologist, I do not use couches, prescribe medicines, or work with abnormal behavior. The main difference between my sports mastery program and a psychotherapist is that I work with athletes on sports performance enhancement. I tend not to get into personal challenges such as divorce, breakups, grief counseling, or abnormal behavior. Although those areas of life do affect sports performance, when need be, they are addressed. My philosophy is that you cannot separate the mental from the physical when it comes to performance. After all, decisions, thoughts, images, and feelings drive motor behavior. So how do you know when you need or can benefit from my sports mastery program? My goal is to help the student athlete identify barriers to hard work, identify barriers to teamwork, and enhance sports performance by improving mental skills for success. Do you have any doubts about your sport before or during competition? Do you get so anxious that you don't have a calm mind or think straight in competition? Become easily frustrated when things do not go according to plan? So when you consider these questions, the next obvious question is this: when is my sports mastery program needed? You don't perform well when others are watching you. The sports mastery program is needed when you maintain doubt about your sport before or during games. You feel anxious or scared when you perform in competition. So how can the student athlete benefit from the sports mastery coaching program? They will have improved focus and the ability to concentrate and manage distractions. Develop systems and strategies to increase confidence and eliminate doubts and fears. Develop coping skills to deal with setbacks and errors. Find the right zone of intensity for their sport. The student athlete will also learn to develop and enhance communication skills. The student athlete will benefit by learning to develop a healthy belief system and identify irrational thoughts. The student athlete would also benefit when they learn to improve and balance motivation for optimal performance, develop confidence post-injury. The student athlete will benefit from my sports mastery program by learning to identify and enter the zone more often. At the end of the day, my sports mastery program does not apply to a wide variety of athletes. This program is for the serious athletes only. Most of my student athletes are in junior high, high school, and college. However, they are highly committed to excellence in seeing how far they can go in their sports. My sports mastery program is not something they need, it's something that they want. These student athletes love competition and testing themselves against the best in their sport. They understand the importance of positive attitude and mental toughness. These student athletes want every possible advantage they can get, including the mental edge over competition. The first thing we do is identify the student athlete's hopes and dreams, pains and fears, and barriers and limitations. This serves as a guideline and helps the student athlete to think about mindset. When we first meet in person or virtually, I ask more questions about mindset and beliefs based on assessment results, so we can develop a complete picture of your mental game. Once the game plan is developed, we will begin our work on mental skills that apply to your current and specific challenges. I present a sports mastery program that is customized to the athlete's individual needs. I always include the core foundation mental skills for all of my athletes. We apply the sports mastery concepts and skills to practice, pre-performance preparation, warm-up routines, and post-performance assessments. The next step is to decide if my sports mastery program is something you want. Not everyone wants to take the time to learn about mindset and how it affects an individual sports performance. I can tell you by participating in my sports mastery program, you'll set yourself apart from other student athletes. I help the student athlete transform, shake their limiting beliefs, silence monkey mind chatter, and equip them with the tools to succeed. Sports Mastery will provide you with the tools to maximize your game in competition and in the classroom. To learn more, visit sportsmastery.com/coaching.